Welcome back to the JCHoops Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Collier with HawgBeat.com. I have a very special guest today on the show, Ben McKee from Volquest.com, the Rivals affiliate over at the University of Tennessee. Ben, how are you doing tonight?
I'm well. How are you?
Man, I'm doing well. Excited about this matchup. Big matchup Saturday, top 25 in Bud Walton Arena. What's the general vibe going on right now in Tennessee?
That exact word that you just used, excitement. Everybody's really excited right now for Tennessee basketball, which is the polar opposite of what the feeling was a month ago. Tennessee beat Kentucky pretty good on Tuesday night in Thompson Bowling, but it was a month from the day of when Kentucky completely embarrassed Tennessee in Lexington. And at that point, Tennessee was 2-3 in SEC play, back-to-back losses to LSU on the road, and then that loss to Kentucky on the road. And it felt like Tennessee was destined for a first weekend exit in the NCAA tournament, and not a lot of feel-good feelings around the program from a fan perspective, but they've completely turned it around since then. They've won 8 straight SEC games, 8 out of the last 9 games. The only game that they've lost during that stretch is the Texas in the SEC Big 12 Challenge, and even that, you had a wide open 3 at the buzzer to win that game, and the shot just didn't go down. So there's a lot of good vibes, positive vibes, and the play of Tennessee of late, and kind of validating their win streak the other night. Their win streak consisted of Vanderbilt twice, LSU when LSU was really struggling, South Carolina, A&M, Mississippi State, some quality opponents in there, but nobody like Kentucky, not a top 5 team. So Tuesday night kind of validated this turnaround that Tennessee is on, and a lot of people are feeling real good about Tennessee going into March.
And you see, that's one area where it's kind of the two programs are very similar. Arkansas started conference play 0-3. JD Notae was out against Mississippi State, but then you lose to Vanderbilt at home, and it's just really not a good look to start out conference play. Then you rattle off 9 in a row. So you kind of have that same kind of feeling surrounding the programs. I was going to save this question for later, but since you brought it up, what do you think the biggest adjustment, specifically between the first matchup at Kentucky and then the later matchup against Kentucky? Because looked like at Kentucky, Kentucky was clicking on all cylinders, but Tennessee under Rick Barnes, usually known for their really good defense and allowed over 100 points. But then just a couple nights ago, Tennessee physically dominated Kentucky at Tennessee.
Yeah, I there's obviously some basketball tweaks that have been made to turn things around, but the biggest adjustment has really come within the locker room, and guys not necessarily buying into their roles, but more so growing comfortable within their roles. And leadership has developed. Those Grant Williams and Admiral Schofield teams, those teams were special because they had bona fide leadership with Grant, Admiral. You had Lamonte Turner, who was a big-time presence on that team, Jordan Bone, Jordan Bowden, Kyle Alexander. I mean, the list goes on and on of guys who were really good in the locker room from a leadership standpoint. And not saying that this locker room didn't have good characteristics of being a good leader, but they just hadn't really found it yet. And you ask Rick Barnes after that first Kentucky game who the leaders are on the team, and he mentions Uroš Plavšič, who was a guy coming off the bench at the time who hadn't really played a ton, and Jahmai Mashack, a true freshman who's barely played any. And those were the first two names that came to mind for Rick, and I thought that was very telling at the time. And since then, it's been a complete 180 in terms of leadership on the team, and the players will tell you it's been all about accountability and being fed up with kind of the start that they got off to, and drawing a line in the sand, and just now being willing. They were too nice, quite frankly. They're too nice and kind of afraid to say something to one another if a guy needed to be held accountable, and the accountability has completely flipped since that moment. So I think that's been the biggest reason that Tennessee has turned it around. But from a basketball perspective, the defense has also been critical. Tennessee's been better guarding the ball, keeping defenders in front of them. If you go back to that Kentucky game where they lost really, really bad, they couldn't keep Ty Washington or any guard, Severe Willard. No, they couldn't stay in front of anybody. And Kentucky was hot that night. That was like their best shooting performance in 25 years in conference play. So they literally could not miss. So Kentucky would have beaten anybody in the NBA on that night. But they've gotten so much better defensively, and in the post, they found more of a presence in the post. They've been better on the perimeter defensively, and that's led to easier offense for them as well, because the old saying that, hey, when you're playing good defense, it kind of takes care of your offense.
No, absolutely. The more you talk, number one, you keep getting to my questions before I even get to them, which is perfect because you knew exactly what I was going to ask about. Number two, I just see more and more similarities between these two programs the more you talk about them, because Arkansas, like I said, started 0-3 in conference play, and then they had that same, even in the middle of their win streak, they had that same like, oh, who have you beat kind of thing. Like they beat LSU on the road, but they didn't have Xavier Pinson and they weren't playing well. So did it count? National analysts will tell you no, even though it was still a road win at LSU. Then you win against your Georgias, your Ole Misses, all that sort of stuff, until you get to the Auburn game where Arkansas beats number 1 Auburn at home, which kind of validated it, kind of like Tennessee just got validated in their streak over Kentucky by just physically dominating Kentucky. I laughed when you mentioned Schofield and Williams, because I literally have a question written out. This year, this Vol team is playing similar to the 2018-2019 team with Schofield and Williams. What can you attribute that to, at least at this late in the season, having that kind of come about seemingly out of nowhere? After the first half of the season, there was no real identity with the program, and then now there is one.
Right. It's honestly, I think, been the personality of Zakai Ziegler, their true freshman backup point guard. He has that. I'm assuming I answered a question that you're going to ask with that laugh there. But it's been his personality that's kind of been infectious. And I mean, we're 5-6 games away from the end of the regular season, but halfway through the year, he was already a fan favorite. And I'll say that it was at the level of, it definitely is now at the level of the fan favorite that Grant Williams, Admiral Schofield was. It's just that attitude, that it factor that kind of Grant and Admiral had, and Zakai has that, and his story is phenomenal for anybody who hasn't heard it. I mean, Tennessee's down at Peach Jam, just obviously they're doing what they need to do in recruiting, being at Peach Jam, and Zakai Ziegler catches on to a team, and I believe at the time he had no offers, and I mean, he's this 5'9" point guard out of the Bronx, and just I think he was going to do a year of prep school. So he was actually in the 2023 class, this upcoming class that Muss has put together so brilliantly. And he was going to be in that class because of a year of prep. So this is his first year removed from high school, but he was in that class because he was going to do a year of prep because he didn't have any other options. And Tennessee found him and signed him early in August, I think it was, or right before school started in August, like 2-3 weeks after they saw him at Peach Jam. He's in Knoxville, and from the moment he stepped foot on campus, the coaches took notice of him. I mean, he stood out from the moment he stepped foot on campus, and it's been 0 to 100 since, and he's just been phenomenal. And Kennedy Chandler, obviously the freshman point guard for Tennessee, that gets all the notoriety and probably a first round pick after this year. But Zakai Ziegler is just as impactful as Kennedy. They both play so well together, especially now. They're both really hitting their stride. Kennedy had some early season struggles on the defensive end, and he's kind of figured that out, and now his offense has come back along with the defense. And I'd say it's the personality of Zakai Ziegler. That he's a guy that I mentioned earlier. The biggest issue was nobody really holding each other accountable, and Zakai Ziegler is not afraid to hold anybody accountable. This is a guy that says that he used to sleep in the back of the train so that he could avoid pain, or he'd hide out in the train bathroom so he could avoid pain while he was going on the subway to go play basketball somewhere in New York City. So he doesn't back down from anything. And I think this team has kind of adopted that personality. And there's been a couple of run-ins with other teams of late, and not in a bad way. And it's kind of sparked the team. LSU and Tennessee got into it a couple of weeks ago when they were in Knoxville. There's the moment where Zakai Ziegler tickled the nose of Tyree Appleby. He was defending him at the top of the key on the ball, and Tyree Appleby's just kind of holding steady, dribbling in place, and Zakai Ziegler reaches out to put a hand in his face and tickles his nose. That was pretty funny. And then even on Tuesday night, for whatever reason, the Kentucky strength coach wanted to pop off at the mouth at Tennessee, and Zakai was like, "No, we're not having this," and kind of gave him a little shove back. So that's the Admiral Schofield and Grant Williams attitude, just the not gonna back down, and we're gonna punch you in the face whether you like it or not. And they needed that because they had a bunch of guys who were kind of afraid to hold each other accountable because they were too nice to each other and too good at kids. But Zakai Ziegler's the right rough around the edges type of guy.
Yeah, and I feel like Plavsic kind of falls into that category too. And I was going to plan on bringing him up a little bit later as well. I was going to ask about how Ziegler stepped up for the program. I think he pretty much just covered that with his attitude, his leadership, and his never back down mindset. I came from nothing. I was under recruited. I was way overlooked. Wasn't even planning on going to college. Now I'm the starting point guard as a freshman of a potential Sweet 16 Elite 8 team in the NCAA tournament. So you have all those things going with Zakai Ziegler. It's funny. I was actually going to mention Plavsic and that attitude that you were talking about a little bit later, when we will get to him too. You just mentioned Ziegler. I was going to talk about, he's under recruited. What does he bring to the team? How did he step up to help the program? You go from living in the Bronx, and like you said, you're hiding in train bathrooms to avoid violence, whatever you're avoiding, and now you weren't even planning on being in this class, and you're starting point guard for a team that's pushing for a Sweet 16 Elite 8 type season. They're on the 3-4 seed line right now. Just an absolutely incredible story from him. One question before I kind of focus on game planning and stuff. How did Barnes kind of find that sweet spot as far as balancing playing time between Ziegler and Kennedy Chandler? Because, Kennedy Chandler's this highly touted, one of the top recruits coming out of high school, and looked the part from day one. And like you mentioned, had some struggles defensively, but by and large has been a really good freshman. And how do you balance that to where it's effective for the team? And obviously whatever he's done has worked.
Yeah, that has been a key thing that Rick and his coaching staff has had to figure out. And Rick's always been the type of coach of he's going to throw guys out there, and Kennedy has started all year long. But if Kennedy turns it over, Zakai Ziegler's coming right in. He does, and it can be frustrating for fans at times. Players do not have a long leash whatsoever right now. That player is Justin Powell, the Auburn transfer. He's kind of, I'd say, the fifth guard. And he does play, but he's behind Santiago Vescovi. He's behind Josiah Jordan-James, and then he's behind Kennedy Chandler, Zakai Ziegler. So he does play, but it's not as much as people anticipated coming into the year because of that 10-game stretch that he had last year. But Powell's the greatest example of that. Everybody thinks of him as a shooter, but Rick Barnes doesn't want just a specialty guy out there. He wants a guy that's going to be able to kind of do everything. And Powell's trying to evolve his game and become better on the defensive end. And the moment, he can check in with 4 minutes left in the first half and only be thinking that he's going to play 2 or 3 minutes, that little spurt there in the first half. And if he checks in and that first possession, he gets blown by because he's not ready to go defensively, he's coming right back out. Offensively, if he commits a silly turnover, he's coming out immediately for Victor Bailey Jr. or Santi or somebody else is going back in. So that's kind of been the approach with Zakai and Kennedy as well, and with anybody on the roster. And it's always been that way under Rick. He does not give a long leash until you have established yourself. Now, Zakai and Kennedy and they have a little bit of a longer leash. He'll if Kennedy starts off and those first 2 minutes aren't going well of the game, Zakai's coming right in. They won't wait till the first media timeout. Josiah, Jordan James, and Santiago Vescovi, now that they're veterans and juniors and older guys, they do have a little bit of a longer leash and can get away with much more. But those youngsters, the way that they balance the playing time, and it's all earned. It's all about production, and the players know this. And I think the one thing that is really special about Rick Barnes as a coach, and this goes back to recruiting, he doesn't promise anything. He does not. He does not. And there are coaches all across America. I'd say the vast majority of coaches telling 5 stars and 4 stars, whoever they want, like, hey, you come here, you're going to play this, you're going to do this, you'll start for us. Rick doesn't do that at all. He says, you can come in, we'll develop you, and what you earn is what you'll get. If you come in and you work hard and you produce in practice, then you'll play. If you don't do those things, then you're not going to play. So I think just Rick's philosophy in general has really kind of shaped that as well. But now it's gotten to the point to where he doesn't really have to pick and choose between Zakai and Kennedy. They're out there on the floor a ton. And part of that is because of Tennessee's lack of depth in the post and the injury to Olivier Camwa. Their most efficient lineup is a small lineup with Josiah, Jordan James at the 4, and then Santi, Kennedy, and Zakai is kind of your closing lineup, along with whichever post player is playing the best that game. So he's reached the point now, because both guys are really clicking, that he doesn't really have to decide who's going to play over the other.
Gotcha. And, again, just as far as what Barnes promises or doesn't promise as far as playing time, he essentially just promises, hey, work hard, and you might have a spot. Like, that's it. And that kind of speaks to why he's been so successful for so long in the college game. He doesn't make those sort of promises. He doesn't play favorites. He wants guys who play hard and who go out there and run his system. And that's why he's had such success at Texas and now at Tennessee and even other stops before then. Talking about defense with Justin Powell and some other guys as far as rotationally, and even bringing up Plavsic and the attitude he has and all that sort of stuff. Defense has been an issue, or not an issue, but it's been a strong suit for Rick Barnes, coached teams for most of his career. He comes against an Arkansas team who might not be as offensively efficient as they have been in previous years, but they still have the firepower. They still have, I feel like it changes every game, but either the first or second leading scorer in the SEC and JD Notae. It's kind of alternating between him and Scottie Pippen Jr. You have him, you have an offensive emergence out of Jalen Williams and even Stanley Amude, who's shooting 42% or so from 3 in conference play. What exactly do you expect Rick Barnes's defensive philosophy to be, especially, or I guess specifically in handling JD Notae and Jalen Williams?
Yeah, defense is non-negotiable with Rick Barnes. If you're not cutting it on the defensive end, you're not going to play. It's as simple as that. And that's a big reason. Like I was mentioning earlier, Justin Powell hasn't played. And there were times earlier in the year where Tennessee's offense was really struggling up until that Kentucky game that we discussed earlier. And everybody was clamoring for Justin Powell because he is a great shooter. He's the best standstill shooter on the team. He would win a 3-point contest or be the most likely to win one. And then he had that 10-game spurt with Auburn to where he just lit the world on fire last year before he got that head injury and missed the rest of the year. But he wasn't cutting it on the defensive end, so he was not playing. And that frustrated a lot of people, but just goes to show that defense is a non-negotiable with Rick Barnes. And there's another 5-star on the roster, Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, who's kind of been struggling on the defensive end at times this year as well. And he hasn't played near as much as people anticipated him playing. So going into Saturday's game, Rick hates playing zone. So I don't think that you'll see a zone defense unless he just absolutely has to. I'll be real curious to see what he does in terms of matchups. Josiah Jordan James typically draws the matchup of the other team's best offensive player. And sometimes he'll switch it up. Kennedy Chandler, if it's a true point guard on point guard type of matchup, then Kennedy will draw that assignment. Zakai will draw that assignment as well. But I would imagine Josiah is the man that sticks JD Note. He typically gives Josiah the first crack at it. But he also, I mean, it's not going to be Tony Allen, where Tony Allen is showing up to a game that night and he's in charge of Kobe Bryant and that's all he's in charge of, or Kevin Durant or whatever. He likes to put different guys on the other team's best player. He'll rotate through guys. So that won't be Josiah's only responsibility, especially because they're really hurting in the post right now with Olivier Camois' injury and just the post hasn't been what it should be this year, even before the Olivier injury. So Josiah's had to play more of that 4, and he's capable of doing it in a small ball lineup. Now against a team that is bigger, like a Mississippi State a couple of weeks ago, I thought that would be a real issue for Tennessee, but they were kind of able to overcome that and win that game on the road because they need Josiah to crash the boards because he is a really good rebounder for a guard or a wing player, however you want to look at him. But I would imagine Josiah gets the first crack at JD Note, and they'll kind of rotate from there. And if Josiah's having success, they'll stick with him, and Rick won't be afraid to put anybody else on him either.
So who do you think draws the assignment for Jalen Williams then, with him kind of exploding both on the perimeter and even being able to drive and be more versatile inside too?
Yeah, that's a great question that I don't know, quite honestly, because I would say Olivier Camois would be able to do that because Olivier was a real physical, athletic stretch 4 that was really coming into his own. I hadn't really played a ton the last couple of years. He was a developmental guy when they signed him and kind of new to basketball. He's from Finland, so hadn't played a ton of basketball when he signed with Tennessee, but was finally getting to play in games and kind of got off to a rough start to the season. But because he was playing so much, was finally learning and growing and developing and really coming into his own. And he came down on his left ankle against South Carolina a couple of weeks ago and had to have surgery because of the injury that he suffered, and because of the timeline and where we are in the season is likely out for the rest of the season. But he was, again, coming into his own, really physical, really athletic, and watching Jalen Williams from afar, that seems what he is. And I think Olivier Camois could have defended that. Now, without him, I think Jalen's a little too athletic for John Fulkerson. I don't know that would be a great matchup, but we'll see. It wouldn't surprise me if Fulky's able to make some things happen. Fulky's effective because he's just all hustle all the time. And so maybe he can make some things happen. The real intrigue is Jonas Adu, a guy who is a freshman, a former top 100 player when he signed, but he had COVID back in the preseason and then also dealt with an injury. And that really set him behind. And he's just now catching up. And since preseason practice started, Rick's talked about him as being the team's best rim protector. He just was kind of behind on defensive schemes and not really knowing where to go. And Rick has talked recently about him really starting to figure it out the last 2 or 3 weeks. And then against Kentucky and Oscar Tshiebwe, of all people, on Tuesday night, I mean, he has, I think it was 5 points, 7 rebounds, 3 offensive rebounds, and 3 blocks out of nowhere. And this is a guy that was really only his 3rd time this season receiving serious minutes. The Saturday, last Saturday, not this past one, but I guess a week and a half or so ago, that South Carolina game where Olivier got hurt, that was his first action. And then he played a little bit at Mississippi State. He played a little bit against Vanderbilt this past Saturday. And then he played a lot against Kentucky and was a huge impact. So possibly him. I just don't know how he'll do away from the basket, but at the rim, he's a legitimate rim protector. So I'll be real curious to see what Rick does to try to eliminate Jalen Williams' production.
And that's a freshman going against Oscar Tshiebwe, who is
right.
He might not be the National Player of the Year. He's at least in the running for SEC Player of the Year and in contention for National Player of the Year. So for a freshman to have 3 offensive boards, 5 points, and 7 total rebounds, and even grab a couple of blocks there against one of the top players in the country, that really says something about his development. Speaking of John Fulkerson, he's kind of had a drop-off in production this year compared to his previous 2 seasons. but he's still a mainstay in the rotation. He seems to still be a very vocal leader, still seems to be in that kind of fan favorite / Tennessee identity type of thing. What is number one, what is his role exactly? Kind of how has it evolved? And number two, what does he mean to the team outside of his actual, just strictly his basketball playing abilities this year?
Yeah, Folky means everything to Tennessee basketball, and especially to the fans. I mean, he's been a fan favorite for years now. He's an East Tennessee kid from Kingsport, Tennessee, which is about an hour and 15 minutes northeast of Knoxville, up where East Tennessee State is, and grew up a Vol fan. Always wanted to play basketball at Tennessee, and he's not the most athletic guy on the floor, or he's not the guy that's going to jump out of the gym or just have a million block shots or shoot the prettiest jumper, but it's just his hustle and his work ethic and just his love for Tennessee that makes him effective. And he's had big time moments in a Tennessee jersey. 2 years ago, he went up to, I think it was 2 years ago. Yeah, it was the season in which COVID canceled the tournament. So 2019, 2020, he went up to Rupp Arena, who Tennessee hates Kentucky in basketball more than anybody, and dropped 27 and led Tennessee to a big time win. And that was kind of the first year without Grant and Admiral and all those guys. So many people weren't expecting Tennessee to win that one, but he goes out and he drops 27. And then even the other night, 14-8. He's kind of always had these big time moments. And then the fact that he's from East Tennessee, the fans have always adored and loved him. And he's got a goofy personality too. I mean, he's an absolute goofball and in a good way, and just a fun, kind-hearted guy. So the fans have been in love with Folky for a very long time. And he's his role. He's coming off the bench right now because he hasn't been as good as he was 2 years ago, that COVID shortened season when he was named not preseason, but after the season, he made the All SEC second team, I believe it was. And the last 2 years have kind of been down for him. Last year, he had COVID kind of at the beginning of SEC play, and that seemed to have knocked him off track. And then he finally got going again. And then Omar Payne from Florida delivered that just disgusting elbow in the SEC tournament and ended his season there. And then this year, it's kind of been the same thing. Got off to a decent start, but then had COVID during Christmas break and had to miss 2 or 3 games. And it's been slow getting him back. Rick had to take him out of the lineup. And now he's finally got his groove back and providing those energy minutes that he typically does. And they talked to him about starting instead of coming off the bench after Olivier Camwell got hurt. But he said, hey, I feel good coming off the bench. I'll start if you need me to, but I feel really good with my role coming off the bench. So he's typically in that closing lineup to end the game, but he's a guy that's coming off the bench right now. And in the last couple of games, it seems like he's really found his groove once again.
One more guy I wanted to focus on before we kind of start wrapping up and just talking just generally about things. Uros Plavsic. He has come on and, his stats don't stand out from box scores necessarily. But he's a guy who is very large, very physical, and does not back down from anybody. What has he meant to this team in helping find an identity along with, Zakai Ziegler and finding that toughness that kind of spurred this win streak for Tennessee?
Yeah, he's just like Zakai Ziegler. He's not the most efficient basketball player per se, but his personality is what allows him to have some really good moments here and there. He's not a guy that can be your best post player. He probably doesn't need to be your second best post player, but he's kind of a enforcer coming off the bench. And after that Kentucky game, when Folky was really struggling and they went to Vanderbilt that Tuesday, Rick put Uros in the lineup and it paid off. Again, his stats weren't great that game. I think he maybe had like 10 and 6, if that. but it was just his demeanor and his attitude. And Vanderbilt and Tennessee also do not like each other. And Vanderbilt players were kind of running their mouth, and Uros was not having it and was not afraid to back down. And then LSU, I think it was, came that Saturday or within one of those next couple of games, and for whatever reason, their equipment managers, I guess, were throwing the basketballs into the stands while Tennessee was warming up. Yeah, right. That's the face we all had. And it's just like, who even does that? Like, I've never even heard of that.
It's just weird. I like even high school pettiness. That wasn't a thing.
Yes, I mean, I don't think middle school kids do that, but that really pissed off Tennessee. And you got into the game, and LSU was kind of pushing and shoving, and Uros was also pushing and shoving and not backing down from anybody. So yeah, he has that Zakai Ziegler effect as well. He's just, quite frankly, not as good of a basketball player as Zakai Ziegler, but he's meant a lot. His teammates love him. He's very vocal. The running joke around Knoxville kind of before this year, before he was playing meaningful minutes, was that he's the best teammate in college basketball because he just does not stand. He doesn't sit down on the bench. He's just always standing and always cheering, always happy. You'll never catch him pouting or anything. He's always supporting his teammates. So that's the role that he plays on this team. And it's been an important one as Tennessee has turned around its season from a leadership standpoint and just kind of finding that fire within them to go out and not let teams push them around. He's the enforcer of the team, and his teammates truly love him.
Now, as someone who covers Tennessee, obviously, I cover Arkansas, but I feel like as beat writers, we kind of have that same mentality of, you're watching around the conference, you're watching upcoming opponents, you're seeing what's going on. When Arkansas beat Auburn at home, what were some of your thoughts, knowing that Tennessee had to go into Bud Walton Arena in the next couple weeks, the very next Saturday after that coming Saturday? What were your thoughts after seeing that game?
I sat down and watched every minute of that game. If I recall, Tennessee did not have a game that day. I think was that on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night?
It was on Tuesday night.
Yeah, I think Tennessee played on that Wednesday night against somebody. Tennessee didn't play that night, so I was glad that I got to sit down and watch it. I was looking forward to that game all day, and it lived up to the billing. And my initial thought, as somebody who also went to Tennessee and has been watching Tennessee basketball and football all my life, my initial thought was, and this is also a running joke amongst Knoxvillians and people who follow Tennessee, is that, of course, this X team gets great or does great right as they're getting ready to play Tennessee.
Sounds just like Arkansas fans.
Yep. Yep. That was the thought that, okay, not that Arkansas was like bad to start the year, but I know that some national media members, AKA Jeff Goodman, wanted to kind of put Arkansas down because of the strength of schedule, which is fair. And they hadn't really beaten anybody marquee, and just watching from afar, they weren't necessarily passing the eye test, but they certainly are passing the eye test now. And just getting JD Note and Jalen Williams, those guys that you mentioned, getting them going has been key. But that scene in Fayetteville that night was really, really cool. And honestly, I had broader thoughts kind of just about SEC basketball in general than I did Arkansas specific, to be quite honest. And just how far SEC basketball has come over the last decade. It's as, I'm a younger guy, but it's as great as I've ever seen it. And it seems like it's as great as it's ever been. And it's just real cool for schools all throughout the SEC, outside of maybe a 2 or 3, looking at you, Georgia, that they're finally taking more than just football seriously. And it's cool. Like Tennessee's experiencing that right now with baseball. I know Arkansas fans are big with Arkansas baseball and Dave Van Horn and whatnot, but Tennessee fans have kind of started to come around to baseball. So that was kind of my thought, that it's cool that these SEC schools are finally jumping in with 2 feet to all sports and not football. And that atmosphere inside of Bud Walton was as good as you'll find in college basketball that night. So I had thoughts about the SEC from a broad standpoint, and then just also thinking of course, Arkansas is playing great basketball as Tennessee's around the schedule, or around the corner on the schedule.
So Tennessee has a pretty decent road record this year. They're 4-4 on the road, and a lot of that, or maybe all of it, includes conference wins and in conference play. Which you go 500 on the road in conference. That if you take care of business at home, you're pretty much guaranteed a spot in the NCAA tournament, especially with a team or a conference that is as strong as it is this year. And Tennessee's gone to Kentucky. They've gone to Alabama this year. Um, you haven't seen firsthand Bud Walton Arena this year. Do you think Tennessee has seen an environment like Bud Walton was against Auburn? Because they're the only reason I ask that is because Arkansas is kind of pulling out all the stops for this weekend too. They're doing a red out. They did a white out against Auburn. They're doing a red out for Tennessee. They have a bunch of former Razorbacks who are professional Hogs. They have Bobby Portis coming in. They have Daniel Gafford coming in, Mason Jones, Isaiah Joe, like all of these types. They have signees like Nick Smith Jr. is going to be there. They have rumored 5-star prospects for the 22 class going to be there. That's the main reason why I ask if Tennessee has seen that atmosphere like Auburn saw last weekend, because it's going to be very similar, it seems like, this weekend for Tennessee. And Tennessee does have an experienced roster. They have some freshmen playing a lot. They also have a lot of juniors, some seniors playing. Do you think they've seen that sort of absolutely raucous, insane crowd?
I'll say no. And I would put an asterisk next to Tennessee's road record. I think some of their road wins have come against teams that they should beat, even if it is on the road. Like they beat, like you mentioned, 4-4. Two of those wins are South Carolina and Vanderbilt. I'm trying to think of the other two road wins off the top of my head, but they haven't really played well on the road until they've gone on this winning streak. They beat Mississippi State as well. So Mississippi State, Vandy, Carolina. I'm blanking on the fourth road win, but
to be fair, Mississippi State is very tough to win at.
Yes, absolutely. I was honestly surprised that they were able to win. I thought that was the first game without Olivier Camwa. Mississippi State, a team that's really efficient in the paint, and the hump is a hard place to play. You're correct. That's been the best road win, though, off the top of my head, unless I'm just forgetting somebody. But that was last week, though. That was the game the day after Tennessee or Arkansas Auburn that I was trying to remember. But that was just a week and a half ago, and that was their best road win of the season. They went to Texas for the SEC Big 12 Challenge, and that was a great environment because Rick Barnes was going back home to Texas. But it wasn't. It was a nice atmosphere, if you want to call it that. Like everybody was there to cheer and celebrate Rick Barnes, and obviously that won't be the case this weekend at Arkansas. Not that Arkansas fans just have this hate for Tennessee, at least not one that I'm aware of, like other schools in the West that I'm sure that they hate far more. This will be their toughest road challenge yet. And they played in Rupp, and I was at the game at Rupp, and it was a large crowd, but it was in terms of like the atmosphere, the vibe in the building was just kind of okay, whatever. It was ho-hum. I didn't think it was anything special, quite frankly. And there were people there. So I think that this will be the most energized crowd that Tennessee has played in. And I'll be real curious to see how they respond. Again, up until a week or so ago, they hadn't played that well on the road. And most of their road success has come against teams that they should beat in that manner. But I don't know. I don't feel confident in Tennessee going on the road and Bud Walton on Saturday, especially since I've seen them on the road in Bud Walton the last couple of years and it hasn't gone in Tennessee's favor. But this team feels different right now. I'm not predicting Tennessee to win. Earlier in the week, I said that I thought they'd beat Kentucky, lose to Arkansas on radio here in Knoxville. And that is because they have not played great on the road and they're perfect at home. But I will say that this team has a different attitude. They found that don't back down from anybody type of attitude. And it would not surprise me if Tennessee walked in there and did not care one bit and beat Arkansas despite all the hoopla.
Fair enough. Last question before I let you go. I know I've taken a lot of your time up tonight. I really appreciate you hopping on here with me. Last question. What is the biggest key to the game for Tennessee to win at Bud Walton Arena?
Yeah, I would probably say turnovers. I know that's super simplistic and super cliche, but That's been the rhyme or reason to Tennessee's success this year is the turnovers. And earlier you mentioned me kind of the difference between the first Kentucky game and the second Kentucky game, and I discussed the defense. The other issue that I should have mentioned, and it was just as big, was turnovers. It was a turnover fest for Tennessee, and then on top of the turnovers, they got the tails whipped in transition, both offensively and defensively. So turnovers has kind of been the tail of the tape for Tennessee this year. When they don't turn the ball over, they're successful, and typically that means that their ball movement is great. They're swinging it from side to side. They're getting good looks. It's when the ball really sticks in one another's hands that they fail to get good shots, and that's when the offense has struggled. And it hasn't lately, and it's been because keeping that ball moving, great ball movement, keeping it swinging, and not turning it over. And they've been able to find offensive success. Their defense is going to allow them to compete with anybody in the country. They have a really good defense. They play really hard. But it's the offensive efficiency that has destroyed them at times this year. And their offense has been miserable to watch at times this year. And it's been because of turnovers and ugly ball movement, non-existent ball movement. So as long as they're doing those two things, I would expect them to find some success on offense. But if they don't do those two things, I mean, they'll get run out of the gym just based on the atmosphere that will take place on Saturday and just kind of what we've seen in the past. So they've got to take care of the basketball Saturday.
All right. Ben McKee from Volquest.com. Thank you so much for hopping on here. Again, I'm Jackson Collier, JCHoops from HawgBeat.com. Thanks so much for tuning in.